Hello, hello. Thank you so much for tuning in for another message with me, Asia Monique. So today we're getting ready to break down chapter 3 of the Olive. Okay, if you guys are not up to speed on chapters 1 and 2, they are in the videos previous to this one. So I'd love for you to go back and check those things out so that you can kind of keep up with me. Yes. So like I said, thank you so much for joining me. If you would just take the time out to hit like on this video, share this video with somebody you feel like needs it, and to subscribe to this channel, it would be greatly appreciated. Okay, I'm getting ready to do something that I should have done in chapter 1 and I didn't, or before I read chapter 1 and I didn't. But I'm going to read. A lot of people probably wonder, like, why the olive? Why did she call this book the Olive? And unless you have purchased the book, well, not unless, you probably, it probably rings a bell to you, like, oh, okay, I see why she would name it the Olive. But not everybody knew why. So I'm getting ready to read the introduction, and it'll be able to make a little bit more sense to you. Okay, thank you for coming back. Okay, the olive. Bring clear oil from beaten olives to make a lamp burn continually. That is Leviticus 24:2. If you want to go back and read that, then feel free. Okay, you get 2 types of oil from the olive: beaten and pressed, named for the 2 stages of the oil's extraction. First comes the beaten oil, a substance of great worth. When workers see that the olives are ripe, they shake or beat them from the olive tree with a stick, causing them to fall onto a cloth-covered pan below, where their pure oil then seeps and collects. This premium beaten oil is the purest, finest, lightest, as well as the most expensive. In the next stage, after the olives are fully drained from the beating, they are crushed or pressed, which tears the flesh cells and forces the remaining oil from the meat of the fruit. Pressed oil, because of its lower quality, is mainly used for cooking, and in times past served as fuel for the lamps. The lamp in the tabernacle, however, was filled instead with pure beaten oil, which burned brighter and longer. So, what is God trying to tell us through this Old Testament command about olive oil? Just like the olive, Jesus suffered a gruesome beating when he took on the sins of the world. And when he later rose with all power of the Spirit in his hands, he shone brightly in our darkness, much like the tabernacle lamp. The fact that God created us in his image, in his likeness, means that we are meant to share in Christ's suffering, that we might also burn brightly in the world. I have learned that in this process, God has to first strip us of certain things that we want to desperately hold on to, often a painful rendering that can hurt every bit as much as if we were an actual olive being crushed and beaten. Yet, the beautiful thing about this pain is that it makes us ready for an important purpose: God's use. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, so that's where the olive came from. Okay, so the title of chapter 3 is Dirty Secrets, and it's not very long. It's probably a couple pages. I pray that you stay with me. Okay, let's go deeper. A couple of weeks later, Scott had a run-in with the police, one that scared him straight. Facing possible jail time, just how much we didn't know, he decided to give up the streets to get his GED and look for full-time work. This was something I had encouraged him to do for years, but he'd always say that he felt the only way to provide was his family and comfort was by earning fast money. He'd always been big on the idea of saving money, but never managed to put it into practice. He would tell me that I was the blame for this, but his own lifestyle and love for expensive toys played a part as well. Scott took good care of our children and me, and we didn't want for anything. If I had my choice, he would have given up the fast life long ago. Our lifestyle was a dangerous one for our children, and only by the grace of God were they never taken away. Money was so important to Scott that he would put it before anything else, and I came to hate money as a result. Scott had always had a love for cars and motorcycles. They were projects for him, and over the years, he had several. He would usually fix them up and sell them, but since the day I first met him, he had been working on one particular car, a candy apple red 79 Cutlass that he had finally gotten all souped up just the way he wanted it. He had put over $20,000 into the car and had used to tell me that if all else failed, we could always sell it for quick cash. So after talking about it, we decided today was the day. We put both the Cutlass and the Dodge Ram up for sale and planned to put the earnings into savings. Scott came to me one day telling me that he had a potential buyer for the two cars, but then I heard nothing else about it. We were beginning to fall on hard times and our money was running out. I was working, but it was barely paying the bills. Although Scott wasn't in the lanes anymore, he still did all that he could to make sure that his family was taken care of. However, he kept a lot of things hidden from me when it came to how he made his money and what he did with it, and only told me what he wanted me to know. Our arguments had become intense now, with holes being punched in the walls, doors knocked off hinges, and things shoveled off the dressers. Our home had become turned upside down by financial hardship, and we had no one to turn to. The people who owed him money couldn't pay him back, and he couldn't call on anyone. He had helped out along the way to return the favor. I believe that the reason Scott couldn't call on those he had helped was because they had this perception that he had really had money, that he wasn't hurting for it as bad as he told them he was. Moreover, money and materials would also come up missing around our house, and it didn't make any sense, either to Scott or me, who it could be, as the only guests we kept were close friends and family. Scott helped so many people and would give them the shoes off of his feet. So I never could understand how anyone would want to take from our home. Despite the thefts, Scott still allowed people to come over, and me, well, I just stopped caring altogether. One day, Scott and I went and grabbed something to eat from Planet Sub, and we were both on our phones sitting next to each other waiting for our food. "Who you texting?" he asked. I was so far gone from my marriage that I was texting Badar as I sat right next to him. "Nobody," I quickly said. "Yes, you were. I saw you. Now, who were you texting?" "Nobody," I repeated. "All right." The cashier told us that our food was ready, so we grabbed it and left. After getting back in the car, he returned to the subject of texting, and now we were arguing. I kept denying his accusations, and Scott became angrier and angrier with every word I said. While he was driving and trying to pay attention to the road, he sat up in his seat and asked the question again. Afraid of him hitting me, I confessed that I was texting a friend. I could see how hard this made his heart drop by the look on his face. Then he began cursing and name calling, but when he finally threw my phone out the window, a feeling of relief came over me. Now any proof of what I had been doing was destroyed. So it was my word against his, just as he thought. I realized Scott was now feeling the very same way I had been feeling for years, and a huge part of me was happy inside about that. I won't lie though, this girl was scared on that ride home because Scott said he was going to beat my ass once I got there. So we pulled up at the house. I sat in my seat and I didn't move. He said, "Bitch, get out the car." But I still just sat there. He came around to the passenger door, opened it, and dragged me out, right to the front door of our house. I am going to stop right here because I realized that I did not pray before I started this. So give me a few seconds. Heavenly Father, please forgive me for not starting this broadcast in prayer. I don't ever want to do a message without you. So I invite you in. I know that you are already here, but I just wanted to stop and honor you and let you know that I recognize your presence, Father. Thank you for being here. I pray over everybody under the sound of my voice, God, that they are ready and prepared to receive this word. God, anoint my lips to speak only what you would have me speak and nothing else, God. None of me and all of you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Okay. Once we got inside, he went crazy, throwing things around the house and tossing me around as well. Then he said we were done, got in his car and left. My mother lived next door at this time, so I took the kids over for her to watch while I went to work. Once there, I called Badar and told him all that had taken place. He used to always tell me how most women didn't know how to cheat and ended up getting caught, and I guess he was right. After shift report, my manager told me that I didn't look well and to take the night off. I called my mother and told her I was on my way back home, and she said okay, but that Scott wanted me to call him as soon as I could. When I got to her house to pick up the kids, I called him from my mother's phone. The first thing he said was a shock. Yeah, I had your brother take me back to get your phone. You know that little app you had on it? I got in that, and I'm on my way home, and don't you go nowhere. Instantly, I hung up the phone and began hyperventilating and pacing the floors. My mother and my children started asking questions, but the only answer I had for them was, "Oh my God," on repeat. The memories Badar and I shared through those text messages were ones that Scott could never prepare his mind to read. Soon in walked Scott up the stairs to our bedroom, asking my mother if she would take our kids next door. I tried to get up off the bed to walk out the room, but he just pushed me back down and closed me in the room until they left. He came back into the bedroom, and the first thing he said to me was, "So you love this nigga?" Before I could get any words out of my mouth, he began yelling in my face and stopping periodically to read off more text messages from my phone. He made himself so mad by doing this that he slammed my phone against the floor, breaking it into several pieces. And there was that familiar feeling of relief again. I couldn't understand how my Eden Hap had failed me so miserably, and I puzzled over how he could throw a phone with no case on it out of the window of a moving car without it breaking, yet destroying it just by throwing it on the floor. In any case, at least now that he had smashed it on the floor, he definitely couldn't read any more messages. I was happy about that. I was real happy about that. Only Badar and I knew the intimate intensity behind those messages. We had thousands of them in that app, including nudes, where, how, when, what it felt like, and our next plot to do it again. As Scott went on about how I had betrayed him, he laid out all the changes he had noticed lately in me. The late morning returns from work, the kind of music I played, the long showers, the mysterious "I'll be right back" runs, the sexy underwear I wore, my new clitoral piercing, and so on. He knew that he wasn't the inspiration behind any of this. He lamented that I never did those things for him, citing especially the nude photos I had sent to Badar. As bad as this sounds, I knew the worst was yet to come because now he was armed with a face and a name. After his rage subsided a bit, he sat down next to me and said, "Now, let me show you something." He had a hidden app on his phone too, one made to look like a calculator. He opened it up and proceeded to tell me how he was still sleeping with the mother of his son and showed me pictures of different women he'd been entertaining as well. I just sat the whole time looking straight forward, without a care in the world, so happy that after all of this, I would finally be free. Scott asked if I had anything else I wanted to tell him, and I said no. He began asking me questions about specific times throughout our marriage, wanting answers. We sat there like two crazy, cruel people hurting each other's feelings with all of the things we were confessing. Excuse me. Even though many of the things he told me hit below the belt, I kept my comments about Badar very brief. In my opinion, he didn't need to know anything more about my lover and what he had already read, and Scott hated that. Finally, incredibly, he said, "Okay, so now that everything is out in the open, can we start over?" I thought to myself that this man must be out of his mind. The next day, I called Badar and let him know what had happened and that my husband now knew what he looked like. I explained that we couldn't see each other anymore because things were getting out of control. He agreed to put some space between us until things died down, but this was hard to do because we were so attached to one another. One morning, Badar texted me and said that he had just saw my husband at the parts store, and I immediately stepped away from work to call him to find out more. He said that they had only locked eyes, but after he pulled out of the parking lot, Scott began following him at a distance. Just the thought of Scott doing something to Badar put me in rage. Although Badar was just as crazy as Scott, if not crazier, still, Scott had some nerve. Scott called while I was still talking to Badar, and I told Badar that I would call him back. I answered the phone, acting as if I knew nothing about what had just happened. Keep in mind, I'm not supposed to be in contact with Badar at all. Yeah, I seen your little boyfriend at the parts store. He looks too young for you, Scott said. I asked him what else happened to see if he would tell the truth, and when he began sharing how he had followed Badar and now knew what type of car he drove and where he lived, I lost it. The reason this angered me so badly is because Scott had been cheating on me for years. How dare you try and pose a threat? I felt he needed to take it and eat it just the way I always had to. Some time passed and Badar and I continued to keep our distance. Okay, y'all. One night I was at home getting ready to wash my hair and decided I would go through Scott's phone while he was sleeping. I didn't really care what he could have been doing, but I just wanted to be nosy, or maybe look for a new reason to pick back up where I had left off with Badar. In doing so, I came across a video of Scott having sex with another woman. No faces were shown, but I knew Scott's body. The video was so gross that I wanted to vomit. He wasn't even wearing a condom. Back in the day, something like this would have hurt my feelings, but now I couldn't find it in me to shed a single tear. I went straight upstairs though and woke him up from his nap. Tapped him. No. Is this you? I demanded. What are you talking about? He asked. I laid the phone on the bed and went to wash my hair. He came downstairs after thinking of which lie he was going to tell. Man, I already know what you're thinking. That video is old. Leaning over the sink, I told him the date on the video was recent and asked him who it was. He told me he didn't remember. You wouldn't believe it. Out of every lie I have ever heard Scott tell, this one was the worst. I had nothing left to say, but I knew what my next move was. Before heading back upstairs, he said, man, I don't want you messing around with that dude because of this. Scott knew what he was in for. It didn't get any worse than that sex video for me. I would have never thought I would ever have to see my husband having sex with another woman. It's one thing to hear about it, but to see it is another. The next day, I talked to Badar and told him I was getting a hotel room and that I wanted him to come stay the night with me. When I left the house that evening, Scott was gone, so I called him and told him I was going to my girlfriend's house for drinks. Badar met me at, Badar met me at our favorite spot for some much needed time together, and Scott didn't hear from me for the rest of the night. Not until the middle of the night did Scott begin calling my phone, so I take it he didn't make it home until late again. Badar asked me in the middle of us having sex if I wanted my phone, but I told him no. The next morning, I knew I had some voicemails I needed to check. I called with the phone on speaker, and Badar and I both listened. That ain't funny, God, I'm sorry. The next morning, I knew I had some voicemails I needed to check. I called with the phone on speaker, and Badar and I both listened to Scott crying, saying, "Oh my God, how could you do this to me? Where are you?" Badar and I looked at each other, and all I could do was laugh. Finally, he knew what it felt like. Badar said, "Girl, you got that grown man crying. Whatever he did, I don't want to do it." This was the first time in 12 years I hadn't come home. On my way home, I was talking to my cousin Salome on the phone about the video I had seen in Scott's phone. She said, "That's why he was crying on the steps?" She then shared that when she had asked him what was wrong, he said, "Asia didn't come home last night, and I also know that she was with Badar." He also made the mistake of telling her who was in the video, and that was all the ammo I needed. It was around 1 p.m. when I pulled up, right when Scott was pulling up too. When he got out of the car, I could tell that he was ready for war, but I had a plan. I put my car window down, and when he asked where I'd been, I asked him if he was ready to tell me who the woman was in the video. As I predicted, he kept up the lie, saying he didn't remember. But when I asked if the girl Salome told me was the one, he admitted it was. I rolled my window back up and said to myself, no more. The heat was totally taken off of me with that confirmation, and I finally understood at that moment the rush of pleasure my husband had felt from cheating all those years. I've concluded that it was the thrill of having something new and getting away with it. Scott went in the house and I smiled. During this crazy, explosive time, money was also running out, and we were now not only in harder emotional times, but in deeper financial trouble as well. One morning, Scott was sitting on the couch. He mentioned that he had a buyer for the vehicles he had put up for sale. He explained how this whole transaction would be through a certain woman who knew somebody else, and that these people specialized in helping customers liquidate their assets. Scott had been communicating back and forth with the woman about the sale for weeks. From my understanding, she had been sending him paperwork and contracts via email to sign. I sat down and had a look at the contracts with Scott before he signed any of it, and if I can be honest, I didn't know what a lot of it meant, as it wasn't my area of expertise. In any case, Scott was willing to roll with it as we needed the money. If I recall correctly, the plan was for the woman to send her husband and son with a flatbed truck to pick up both vehicles and their titles, and then she would send the $30,000 in a check once she got the car sold. A few days later, the two men showed up like the woman said, showing us their driver's license for proof of who they were. Our cars were both in my name, and so I had to sign the back of both titles. Before I did, though, I asked Scott if he was sure. It made no sense to me to send the titles without the exchange of money, but Scott said he was confident that he trusted the middleman. Whenever Scott wanted to make a huge decision that I would question, he would always tell me to trust that he knew what he was doing. I signed the titles while the only thing we had in the world to fall back on was being loaded onto these strangers' flatbed, and so they left with everything, titles and all. I watched Scott sit for hours on the couch playing his video game for the first few days after the cars were picked up. He didn't want to make a move until the mailman came, in fear of something happening with the check. Days turned into weeks as the woman assured him daily, spoken conversations on the phone, that the checks were on its way, until communication turned into unanswered voicemails, text messages, and emails. I noticed whenever Scott became anxious, but there wasn't a whole lot I could say to him. I told you so surely wouldn't have been the right words. We tried looking up the names of the car lot our vehicles had been sent to and came up with nothing. Scott then contacted the man with the flatbed, only for him to inform us that this was not the buyer's husband, as we had been told. After all, he had just been hired to pick up the cars, and that was it. Scott was sick. He was sick. We printed off the text messages and emails that had been exchanged and any other information we could come up with, and went to file a police report. There wasn't much that could be done since we had signed over the titles, but the police were still willing to file the report. In the meantime, I began to do a little research about who this woman was. We discovered that she had already been to jail on several counts of fraud, and found phone numbers and addresses that helped us find out her whereabouts. Scott drove a few hours to where we believe this woman to be, and he stayed there for about a week, visiting all the addresses he had found. I knew he was making a mistake once he told me his idea of how the exchange would go, but by then I was sure he would never find this woman, our cars, or get the money back. Scott has always been an intelligent man and was hardly ever wrong when it came to doing business, so I couldn't believe he had been so naive this time, and neither could he. This crisis caused even more turmoil in our household than usual, and Scott went so far as to try to blame me for not having more knowledge about business and contracts. In the end, the woman who had conned my husband out of everything he had to his name was never heard from again. Scott began looking for work, which wasn't easy to do. Wasn't easy due to his background and lack of work experience and education. Many times in Scott's life, he had grown tired of the fast life and wanted out, but he always felt there was too many people who relied on him financially for him to give it up. All in all, he is a good person with a huge heart, who only wanted better things for himself and the people around him. I always knew that if he had applied himself as much to looking for a job as he did to the hustling, there was no telling where he would be by now. He had the brains to do anything he wanted. Okay, y'all. That, my loves, is chapter 3. So, you know, we made some poor choices. Minds were clouded. We did things that we normally, wouldn't have done, and we just kind of got caught up. The enemy was just really in our marriage having his way. He was really having his way. As one could imagine, it only goes down from here. Chapter 4, Dirty Secrets. I was wondering if I should just go on and read this. This is a heavy chapter, not meaning a lot of pages, but some things really took place in this chapter. Let's see. Are y'all down for another chapter, or should we wait? It's been going for 26 minutes so far. What y'all think? Let's go on and do chapter 4. And I'm gonna just have to title it and make sure that I let you guys know that this contains chapter 3 and 4. Okay, so now